What's going on, everybody? It is time for episode number 58 of Truth Will Set You Free. Thank you guys for being patient as we got the show started. We are ready to go. I see a lot of people already in the comment box. Do us a favor. Go ahead and hit the like button. Comment where you are calling in from. It's been pretty much a week since we did a live. We've got Suni the middle child, and we've got Easy E in the house, and we are going to get this party started talking about Larry Elder for California governor. Let's also talk about Cuba. We all know what's going on there, and if you don't, we're going to talk even a little bit more about that. We also have the Texas Democrats taking that private jet to make sure they didn't actually have to vote about voting laws, so I'm sure voting laws will come up a little bit, and supposedly there is a chance that there is a January 6th social media conservative follower investigation going on. How crazy is it, the world that we live in? Please share this out there, and we're going to get started in just under 1 minute. Again, we've got a decent amount of people starting to watch. Help us trick the algorithm. Hit the likes, hit the thumbs up, hit the hearts, hit the care button. Do everything you can right now. Let's get the show started. It's time for Truth Will Set You Free. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for Truth Will Set You Free. If you guys want to help us out, anything that we do, and we do have a little bit extra stuff, for those of you that are Patreon followers, Motivational Monday was skipped this week, and we'll be doing a Getting Over the Hump Wednesday tomorrow because, if you can't tell, got a little suntan. I was on a little vacation. Also tried to stay as much away from social media as humanly possible because at one point we get sick of this shit. So here's the thing. Patreon right here. If you guys want to support, that's also where you get some extra stuff. Also some more information or the ability to ask me questions directly. I always reply to that. Patreon.com/BetheChange USA. Also, #BetheChange.com/podcast. All of our shows go on podcast. Everything that you have seen on our network is up on that podcast. There was a great show I did with John Paul Rice last week on Changemakers. Phenomenal stuff. So hopefully you guys check that out. Talked all about child trafficking, all the different things in Hollywood and what he's seen. I strongly recommend that episode. Episode? Is that like appetite with an episode? Anyways, time to bring on our guests. We have Suni the middle child and Easy E up in the house. What's going on, you guys? How you guys doing tonight?
Doing well.
Suni.
I'm sorry, I'm eating.
So it was episode. It was appetite and episode all at the same time. I like it.
Breakfast of the champions. Look at this. People ask me, how do you stay so slim and fit? Oreos.
Straight sugar diet.
10 in the morning.
The trend.
I'm looking at everybody's comments. Welcome, guys. Please, as Rob always say, please hit the like, share, and subscribe. We'll get some good stuff to talk about today. Also, I saw Brenda Ringwood's comment in the comment box. There is an event that I'm speaking at August 20th through the 22nd-ish, somewhere right there. I'm going to be posting it's in Kansas City. If anybody wants to see me speak, plus I know Terrence Leffridge, a lot of you guys know who that is. I want you guys to check that out. I'm going to provide a coupon code. I think it's $50 off of a weekend, and literally it's a whole seminar, 3 days long. I'll put that on the Be The Change page. Keep a lookout for that. Looks like I froze up. It might happen tonight. I'm having a little internet stuff, but we've got Suni and Eric that'll just, keep talking while I freeze up. So if I freeze, I apologize. Anything happen in y'all's world that you want to talk about before we get into the news?
I'm like, what happened? So like in my actual life, or just like, what do you mean?
I don't know. Media, anything you've seen on the news that we're not necessarily talking about today, anything like that?
Um, just the Larry Elders thing, and I've been paying attention to Lightfoot in Chicago, and she's kind of catching some heat finally. But other than that, honestly, I've been paying more attention to the crime that's happening within the Black community because of the latest shooting that happened out in California with the 21-year-old. He's actually a rapper, and he got murked on IG live in front of, I think it was like, well, it's viral now, so in front of millions of people. He got shot 12 times in the face. Crazy situation. So I'm working with other bigger conservatives to come up with plans because they need options out here. They need solutions. So that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, the guy that got shot, apparently 10 minutes before that, he was throwing up gang signs, and then he was talking to a buddy of his. And
yeah,
it's like
the reason he was killed was because he disrespected Nipsey Hussle.
It's absurd. Exactly what Nipsey Hussle was trying to change, which is another reason why he's probably no longer with us. Not a random killing. I don't believe that.
Not at all. And
no.
Look, Nipsey Hussle was doing some great, but he was also still promoting gang culture. Like, let's just keep it a band.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing really going on my end. Just kind of been paying attention to the more local issues here recently here in California. I think we're going to kind of touch on this a little bit later, so I'll let kind of us get into it naturally. But definitely some interesting things shaking up here in the California pool for the gubernatorial race.
I always like the word gubernatorial. Actually, let's go ahead and start there because it's a little bit lighter hearted and it's positive. I think I've always been a huge Larry Elder fan. There's a chance, based on our connection with Liberty Revolt, that we might have access to Larry Elder at one point. And it's good to finally see a candidate that speaks for, that's electable on a California level, even with Democrats, that also has conservative values and can speak to a larger group of people. And I also have always thought Larry Elder was brilliant at the same time. So SUNY or Easy, who wants to start talking about this?
SUNY brought it to my attention, so you come first.
SUNY, talk about Larry Elder running for a gubernatorial race in California.
I think he is the perfect candidate for California. Grew up in South Central. He's a native. He's been there his entire life. He can understand, not only can he understand the average American, the middle-class American, he can understand the inner city American. And I think people should actually give him a look. Go to his website, electelder.com. He's actually looking for donations. And I put a post up about this morning. If Kim Klacik can get $6.7 million to not even win her district number one, we can put that much emphasis and support Larry Elder. I honestly think he has more of a chance at beating Newsom than Trimino or Jenner put together. Just going to be honest.
I think it's
your state. What do you think?
So I think it's an incredibly important development. I think if people have been paying a little bit closer attention to the national media, you could see how this was a viable option. He kind of came out about 2 weeks ago, did a few rounds of interviews throughout all of the major news stations, and the question was posed. He definitely said he was thinking about it. Now that he's confirmed, filed, and will officially be running, it is somebody that I think represents a much better class of opportunity for Californians right now. He's somebody who's run large businesses. He's been politically involved for decades now at this point. This is not somebody who's just, testing the water, so to speak, to see if they're a viable candidate for the future. We all know that that Larry's going to carry an America First agenda. Now, I see some hurdles that I am very concerned about. I think SUNY, we kind of touched on this morning a little bit. There are some tremendous hurdles in California. You have to have 50% of the entirety of the vote plus one vote. So you have to have basically 50.1% of the entire pooling's numbers in order to receive the candidacy. Otherwise, it is a failed recall election. And this is how ridiculous it is. Actually, some breaking news today was that when Newsom filed his paperwork, he actually somehow, whether it's a staffer or was his paperwork that he actually filled out, they forgot to mark him as a Democratic candidate. So he's actually going to be running under an independent ticket, which makes this all much more interesting since he switched from a Republican to a Democrat to take the state in the first place. And so I think this is tricky. It's kind of a trick game that they're playing, to be honest. And I think that we do have a couple of polarizing other candidates in the state, particularly Jenner, who I could see taking up 35% of the vote, maybe less, but easily a 35% would be my kind of just ear to the ground kind of feeling. So I think it's going to be an interesting mashup. I think that we have that race is run on September 14th. So there's really only about 6 weeks of lead up until people need to make a decision and have the entirety of the group kind of shake out and decide who's going to be that front running candidate. Otherwise, they'll never meet the threshold, and this will all have been kind of a wash. That being said, I do think Larry Elder is an extremely qualified candidate. I have concerns about not having necessarily the governance experience, but having seen him grow independently, his particularly talk shows and other supporting businesses and stuff, I think that he has much better, again, ear to the ground in California, owning these kinds of things. He can better assess the situation for the average business owner in California. And here in California, I think the statistic is like 70% of people are self-employed on at least some level. So that's going to be a very important topic. Whether that comes down the pipeline and is the topic, can't say. But he certainly has the accolades behind him that would make him a strong candidate in my mind.
So you know better than I do. Explain to me how this whole going from Democrats in, first off, has he always been considered a Democrat? I always thought Larry Elder was an independent, personally.
So I'm actually speaking specifically about Newsom. Newsom actually used to run under a Republican banner.
Oh, I thought you were talking about. Oh, got it.
No, Larry Elder has always been
Larry Elder is a conservative.
He's always been
he's running as
conservative. Yeah, correct. So he's running as the Republican side. Republican.
That's what I thought. Okay, all right. Mm-hmm. Newsom. When was the last time Newsom was on the considered Republican ticket?
It's probably been, honestly, since his breakup with Kimberly Guilfoyle, like around that era. And if people don't know that kind of story, just Don Jr.'s girlfriend currently is Newsom's ex-wife. Or excuse me, ex-fiance, I apologize. Yeah. And so he was a right-leaning conservative in San Francisco terms, which kind of automatically puts you in kind of a Democrat standard category, I would say. So I think he's always kind of had some of his same political desires, but in order to win the state of California, he needed that Democrat label next to his name. So I think that's kind of, just looking back on the historical evidence, it supports that he was switching his team essentially to prep for this run. So he's here now. They have the opportunity to flip him, but again, it's a big hurdle with 50% of the total vote needing to be cast in one candidate's favor.
If conservatives want to have a chance, they're going to have to get together and send forth their best candidate, which at this point, to me, is Larry Elder. But again, it's going to be a huge – Newsom's still going to get his 20, 30%. So they have to find a – I think Newsom is here's what in my opinion, living in the state, here's what happened is in the last 3 months we've had more conservative policies put into the state legislature and from the emergency powers upheld than we've had in the last, I'd say, 2 decades almost combined. And my brother actually pointed this out to me while I was on vacation for the 4th, which is, he said, it's really interesting to see how now that the recall has gone through, how he's began
act more like a Republican or more like a conservative person in a state that typically, wants to go down that progressive route really quickly. So I think his actions speak louder than his words. He came out and said a whole lot of things that sound very conservative, but again, we had a 5-year water supply that's now a water shortage. So total mismanagement of the state, and I think people have gotten rid of their enlightened views of what Newsom could be.
And now it's just going to be about math. It's not going to be about
now it's just math.
It's a mathematical formula.
I think if we have Jenner get in line and support Elder, and then the other candidates I think are 1 to 3 or 5% takers, and there's about 15 of them. So if we can just kind of suck under one candidate, I think we will meet the threshold and ultimately probably have a recall here. I mean, that's how, the governor was put in. It's not impossible. He was definitely, a left-leaning conservative in his social policies, fiscally conservative. But that's kind of par for the course in California as far as Republican candidates, what you're going to get. So
makes sense to me. All right, let's move over to, do we want to talk about Biden knocking at people's door or Cuba next?
I've got both of them pulled up. Your choice.
Stuna, your call. Biden's team knocking, or Cuba's shit show?
I don't know. I don't really have anything to add on Cuba. It's unfortunate what they're going through there. So, I mean, if you guys want to, what Biden is doing is terrible. It's terrible. And I don't like talking about Biden anymore because he's a waste of space. I'm just trying to get through these next 4 years. I'm trying to stay under the radar because they are talking about making the vaccine mandatory for the military coming in September. So whatever you guys want to talk about, I'm down.
All right. I think they kind of relate to each other because what is being presented here with the whole going door-to-door with vaccination is it starts to breed into a totalitarian government, which is what everybody on the left said. Trump wants a totalitarian guy, so he's a dictator. No, it's actually happening, not with Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo would lead you to believe. It's actually having people starting to knock door-to-door, and they're talking about SMS packaging that they would actually start tracking anti-vaxxers. Is it okay? We know it's not constitutional, but they're actually looking at the ability for them to get with the major carriers and see who is anti-vax to make sure those messages aren't sent. Do you know how fucking terrifying that is?
It terrifies me. This is actually this. I think the last 6 months have been the scariest time in our republic of our forefathers, and probably our children's lifetime. Is right now. It's happening right in front of us. I don't like referencing things in akin to the Holocaust because it was a really terrible time and there are not many things that measure up to that standard. But again, I'm going to go to a macro view, which is to say our adversary in this world currently today, China, is having Uyghurs in camps to re-educate them and assimilate them to society. It's pretty evident and clear that there's a huge push from the Chinese media to make sure that our media is also covering the same topic in a way that they like, whether that's through advertising dollars, promotional deals, athletes. There's seemingly a clear agenda being pushed from the east side of the world to our media companies. And the only reason I bring that up is to kind of disseminate this, which is they have totalitarianism in their country. And we've kind of pushed against that for a long time. And now we have a very receptive group of people who may want socialism. And I think that that's the term that they'll use right now. But what they don't remember is that somebody has to be at the top of that structure in order to make it run, which always ends in totalitarianism. So what's concerning to me about this SMS text message thing is they kind of tacked a couple of other things on it that I think are big and important, which is that they're going to go back and they're going to look at YouTube, right? Platforms that we're on right now. They're going to go back there and they want to have your cell phone provider, not just anybody, but just your cell phone provider, be able to filter your text messages, basically, which means the way that we filter ourselves here on this platform in order to make sure that we can keep current and stay in touch with you guys. It will have to speak like that now in our private conversations. So it's very concerning for me as an individual who looks at this and says, well, if they're going to come knock on your door, where did they get the list? Let's start at square one. How do they know whose door to knock on? That's that for me is the first. Yeah, that for me is the very first concerning thing that we need to address as a populace is, well, how in the hell do they have access to our private medical records prior? Like there's already been a huge disconnect, and I think that it's important to point that out to people. They already have a list. It's very clear that they have a list. I'm going to continue to compile a list. Now, I don't mind being on a list for many reasons, but for this particular reason, there should have been a HIPAA law that they are never allowed to violate in order for them to have the information, quote unquote, that they're going to be using to shuffle into our lives and make some decisions for us. So SMS text messages, social media platforms, and now it's your front door is their space, and they're going to come look at it, and they're going to want to knock on it and know what you're doing.
Agreed. I froze up a bit. Is everybody still there? Mic check,
Yeah.
1 2 1 2.
We are still here.
We're good.
You guys sound like a Megatron to me.
Of course.
Oh, gosh.
No, I do think it's hugely concerning, and this is the next thing that people will be looking for is the next knock, and it's not going to be about your vaccine this time. They already see it in the state of New York. They've declared an emergency over gun violence. There is absolutely nothing stopping these people from doing the same as a country right now. So.
Yeah. And I can relate this directly to Cuba. And what's going on in Cuba is simple. They do media blackouts when there is protesting going on. They do media blackouts that keep people from organizing. And we're doing the same thing inadvertently, not inadvertently, very subversively in the United States of America, based on the way that we are having the conversations with allowing certain things being misinformation. I had a Facebook post today saying, well, Facebook and Instagram, they're allowed to do what they want because it's a private company. We've had this conversation forever. And they're saying ultimately they're just preventing misinformation. Misinformation a year ago was that the virus was not created in a Wuhan lab. The misinformation a year ago about, that there'd be vaccine passports, or name that they'd be using RNA binding DNA, an mRNA binding vaccine, which is, again, totally fine if you want to think that. But the fact that we all said it in any of these things were considered misinformation then. So we are actively being chosen what is misinformation and not. So we, in a sense, are already at the Cuban stage of having these weird little blackouts. And out there, my big question, this is where I'll end my point, is our administration is being asked to take a side. Do they take a side with the people of Cuba, or do they take a side with the authoritative communist government? And it's not clear yet which way they're going to go. And once our country does not support people wanting freedom, I watched the New York Post. The New York Post had a way that they presented the media, and if I could find it on my phone, essentially said, New York Times, shouting, this is how they presented this, shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans That's what they deemed an anti-government social security. Hundreds of Cubans took to the streets in cities around the country on Sunday to protest food and medicine shortages and a remarkable eruption of discontent not seen in 30 years. They're literally saying anti-government. These are people that no longer can feed their families, no longer can get milk, no longer can do any of these things because the communist government's no longer providing it the way that they set it up. And they're literally presenting it as these people are just your everyday protester and rioter like we have in the United States, which is not accurate. These people can't survive.
No, and interestingly enough, and I'm going to tie this into kind of what we're doing here at home, which is, this idea that we have a need to be vaccinated and it's not your choice anymore. This goes to something that they're doing. The FBI has come out and said, hey, look, you need to be able to be willing to tell on your family members and your neighbors for extremism, right? So we already have an Orwellian FBI. Like, I don't know how else to say that really. But to this point of Cuba is right now, I'm reading a CNN article. It says in San Antonio de los Baños, a city of about 46,000 people, which is just to the west of Havana. This is saying hundreds of Cubans took to the streets. I have seen some videos. I'd say it's probably thousands, but it says they're fed up after nearly a week of electricity cuts during the sweltering July heat. And this is a direct quote. Everyone was in the streets. One resident who did not want to be named told CNN they've gone now 6 days with only 12 hours of power each day. And that was one of the things that blew this up. And I just want to, I'll touch on this just briefly, which is the initial White House sources were saying that this was a protest due to medical supply shortages for COVID vaccines, which is not the case. And if you've had an opportunity to review some of this footage, what you will see is Cubans in the streets absolutely going crazy, but draping themselves in American flags. They still look at our country as the last free bastion of hope. And that should give, I think, us good cause to be more involved and more aware that when they start knocking on doors, we're just a step away from where Cuba is with their totalitarianism. And it's really important that we look to these guys are only like 90 miles south of us from Florida. So I don't even think they're that, maybe 50 miles. So they're not far away. They see what we're doing on a pretty regular basis. And they are absolutely dying to live the American dream as we sit here and watch it being squashed as individuals. It's really a wild time.
Yeah. And watching what they're going through is this odd little mini preview, and what we are being presented with as even options, whether or not they happen or not, the options being presented by our own administration are so far in one direction. It's become something that I don't know where the line is drawn and where people, and Bobby Sauce has said this on a previous episode, where is the line? Like each week we keep finding something else and something else that's pushing that line of freedom. Like now they're legitimately looking at social media, people that have followed that like people from January 6th. This is another thing that's being presented. People that followed conservative voices that were part of the January 6th insurrection are now being potentially, allegedly, it's being considered that they're going to be following the rabbit hole of their social media. And that's horrific. This is getting to the point where it's like, what did Trump do that can even compare to what we are going through right now based on our administration? Give me one thing.
There is nothing. This is the disappointing. This is the reality. Is actually, I think we can just look back to November time. Trump, when he was holding his rallies, getting ready for the election, actually had a Cuban national who had attained citizenship here in the States speak at one of his prior to the election rallies. And his story was essentially, I came from Cuba to escape oppression. And I see what you guys are doing right now and the agenda that you're pitching. And I'm telling you, I know, I hear you, I see you, and I know where this is going to go. And I think that, I think there are a fair amount of people who have buyer's remorse right now with Biden being in the power position that he's in right now. But I also, I think, again, this is not the U.S. taking a stand on a position as much as we are being bullied on the world stage to adopt what we would regard in all other senses as nonsense. It's incredible to me to see the creep from. And they absolutely are using January 6th as they're using it the same way that 9/11 was used to justify going in for 20 years of war. And I think this war is much different in that it's a very psychological war. And they are actively gaining more compliance every day from civilians than I would have ever guessed would have been tolerable. And this is where I do think actually this article becomes kind of interesting, just to kind of touch back on Cuba a little bit to tie this in. This person wraps up the interview, the one that the state wants to stay anonymous, was saying revolutionaries need to be in the streets now. The order to combat has been given. And I don't think it's necessarily time for people to be out in the streets causing chaos and hurt and panic. But my goodness, if the group of people that were out protesting all summer, last summer, are the people now dictating the agenda, at some point we may have to not get violent, but get collectively out there and show that, hey, we're all for you having your opinion, but in order for you to have your opinion, you need the fundamentals of the conservative movement in order to maintain those freedoms, because pretty soon they're going to come crack down on what you have to say too. This agenda only goes in one direction, and the minute that you're not a useful idiot, you're on the wrong side of history, right? And that's how these things kind of escape into the wild as far as ideologies. Is not enough people resist them and say, show me and prove to me that what you're pitching makes sense and will improve the lives of many. Instead, they get very selfish and they say, how can this improve my life? And they say, for example, I will give, using the shot as one, which is, we had somebody who is a health official on CNN just a few nights ago saying we need to make it difficult for people who are unvaccinated to move around in this country.
Right.
That blows every constitutional fundamental understanding of my free movement in this country. So when we have the White House saying we're going to knock on doors, we have the media supporting the narrative by saying, yes, we need to make it difficult for people who have a difference of opinion on about an illness that has a 99.95 survival rate. We need to question, we need to push back on these people. We need to say, show me your science, and if your science is at all in default, we're gonna come back and push everything you've said down, and we're gonna look through it with a fine-tooth comb, because half of it's bullshit and the other half might be too.
Everything coming from the government in terms, and you watch what it's done to people, and where was it? The family that voted for Biden, they don't see what's going on at all. They have managed to market this in such a way. I continue to ask people, show me something. Show me some of the evidence. Show me that the Delta variant really is more dangerous. I saw an article about one nurse who was anti-V word, wouldn't take it, young, pretty, died from COVID. That's it. So you see one article that now makes it go, look at this. That they were licking their chops to find one person that was anti-V, social media, all these different things. Mind you, this is a person that has been seeing COVID patients over and over and over and over again, didn't get sick, has to wear a mask all the time. That's her job. And then continues to be around it, and something happened, and there was whatever, and I'm assuming her hospital might not be able to use any kind of other treatment, whatever. And people's comments were like, well, she gets what she gets, or well, I guess, I wonder what her last thoughts were. I may bet her last thoughts were, damn, this sucks.
So
I don't think that we're correctly looking at what's going on and realizing there is not a single statistic coming from the side of quote unquote science except for scare tactics and marketing. Plain and simple.
And to that point, Anthony, is one of the things that is a tremendous letdown is we've forgotten that we have tremendously effective therapeutics now against COVID. So anybody who wants to look back at some of the case studies for the right to try emergency use orders for things like Regeneron and some of these other types of treatment, the survival rate was actually higher in some of those instances than what the shot will give you as far as a natural protectant. So I'm not, look, you want to go get the jab, you do that because I think there's a relative foundation of good science behind it. However, I will state this is that it is awfully odd timing that they're now picking out and they're saying this issue is still such a nightmare for our country and killing so many people that now we have to mandate it on a federal level potentially. And in order for you to be in compliance with the government, you're going to need to knock on your door in order to find out just exactly what you've done in the last. Like, guys, again, I hate comparing things to the Holocaust because we're not there, but there is an adage that has been stated, and I've said it before, I'll say it probably 100 times more, which is, in Germany, there was, a lot of people who said, well, it's, they're coming for people in the town next door. What's that? That's not my problem. Well, then it happened to be people in their town and they still said nothing. And then it was their neighbor and they didn't say anything then because they got afraid. And then they came for them and there was nobody left to speak, right? Like we're getting to the point where this soft totalitarian push is turning into mouthful, right? Is turning into a heavy push and it's happening quickly. And I think people oftentimes when it gets compressed in a time frame during panic, often look at it as a slow and steady march towards progress, when in reality, this is by design. They want us to be confused about whether the effectiveness of the vaccine is real or not. They want us to be confused about the social issues that we're currently facing in our country and whether or not they are real or unreal in some degree. And I think that this Cuba instance is a very stark contrast, which is where you have a government that operates in the way that the agenda of the left has been portrayed to us now at this point. And you have people in the streets saying, hell no, like this, we've lived this way. We cannot live this way. We will not live this way. And from us, they're getting a big, basically, F you because we don't want to address it on the world stage and piss somebody off.
Yep. And I want to be clear. I'm looking again at the reported coronavirus deaths per day in the United States. And this week of July 13th, as our media is hyping things up again, making kids in California wear masks again, talking about all the shutdowns that are impending, which again, I'm not going to say won't happen during the fall because we know anybody that's done a fair amount of research knows that vitamin D is the vitamin D deficiency is what causes some spikes and causes us. It's very similar to the way the flu works. Whatever.
The sun powers you.
Right. And the fact that, our immune systems are clearly weaker than they were a year ago. So you look at this, I'm looking at July 13th. We are still either flatlined or going down compared to the prior week. So these scare tactics that they're showing are just wrong. They are wrong. Wrong. Just throwing that out there.
I think it's important to recognize. So here in California, like here's my breakdown: is Javier Becerra, who is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services, was the Attorney General of California for a period. And I can tell you this person has no experience in health and human services. They are unqualified for the position. They were pushed through, I think, on a goodwill effort from the Republican side to say, we'll give you one. But a lot of the things that he's talking about have been, and I'm going to be specific, they have been experimented with in California before. people going door to door for government issues is something that California has done with different things in the past, very soft and very targeted to specific neighborhoods. But in my opinion, was a soft rollout to, I think, what they're trying to do nationwide right now.
So somebody's asking about how in the local news, Central Texas, there's, what did they say? Said that the COVID is on the rise. It could very well be in some places. I don't care, just the same way as when people get the flu, I don't care if the cases are slightly on the rise. What I care about is deaths. Deaths are not on the rise. We are still continuing a path down, period. There is no questions asked. So it's this continued, again, as I always ask, provide me with information that doesn't prove my point. And all I get was, you're a denier. You're an idiot. I believe COVID's a real thing. I believe we mismanaged it. I've said this week after week. We mismanaged it from day one. We didn't use different things available to us because we were so concerned about the $5,000 treatments, the remdesivirs, the ventilators, which, holy God, were $40,000 a pop going here and there, and also making sure that this lasted long enough. This is going to be where I sound crazy or an asshole. This lasted long enough for a mass V word all over the country and world that we are buying shots for other countries in the hundreds of millions. You are paying for it. You, the American people. These are not free shots by AstraZeneca or by Moderna or whoever, Johnson & Johnson. Somebody is still paying them. And I'm going to tell you, the lobbyists are just going like this. And the politicians, when they are out of office that are making sure all this happens, I'm going to guarantee you, allegedly, have a house in the Hamptons just waiting for them. I promise you this. Allegedly.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of these critique notes here at the end of this article that I've been reading a little bit about it. And some of them are very interesting. This person, I think this is exactly what they want, to be frank with you. The prospect, this is a quote from Governor McMaster's, which is, the prospect of government teams showing up unannounced or unrequested at the door of targeted homeowners on their property will further deteriorate the public's trust. Well, why do we need the public's trust deteriorated right now? I think to sow seeds of confusion. That's the easiest way for these people to gain more power. So I liken that to what's going on in Cuba right now, where they have these shutdowns of media. People only have power for 12 hours a day. There's an immense opportunity to gobble up resources, take over, and say, you're not going to overthrow us today. You can try, but it's not happening, right? And we've got our heads so far up our own asses right now with other things that we're not able to clearly disseminate what is right from wrong. And that's a huge moral problem that I have with where the direction of our country is going right now.
Yeah. And what's funny is Danny, I believe, based on his comments, is trolling a little bit. But I agree. The world needs somebody to step up to the challenge. And fact is, China is waiting for a global fight, and they are prepared for it. And you know who isn't?
Not us.
Not
in fact, some studies were done. I think we've got some exercises in the South China Sea. And according to all of the experts, we are not prepared.
No, not at all.
So
not just from a war perspective, but also from a technology perspective as well.
That's right. I think it's incredibly important that people just recognize, like, hey, if Cuba is getting hot in the water, like, it's easy to detach from Venezuela. They are very far away. And people don't remember what Venezuela was coming up to be, or what it could have been. Cuba's been in the same gridlock for 70 years. So, until Russia stops supplying the Cuban government with arms to defeat its people. And remember, it's not illegal to own a gun in Cuba. It's just incredibly difficult. So much to people's chagrin, there is ways to resist, and there is ways to be fundamentally prepared there. However, it is incredibly difficult, and it's something that people have now for many years not taken the chance to do because it's a cumbersome process. And I fear that this is kind of the direction we're headed as a country right now, which is that we're looking to disarm people. We're looking to confuse and distract them. and then in some way or another, we're already getting oppressed, whether that's through media suppression, information suppression, or at this point, I guess, being on a list somewhere, whether you're for ideology or for failing to comply with an unmandated medical procedure. I don't know.
Unapproved, fully approved. Yeah. I'm not going to read this. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I actually discussed this with my parents last night. I said one of the issues that I have right now with this situation is there's no course of recourse if there is penalty to be paid for this for people's health. Just remember that until it is an FDA approved medication, that every time it goes into somebody's body, that is a person who could be maimed or injured that has no petition of recourse. They cannot. This is the same as you going into the hospital and saying, yeah, I want to be involved in the ketamine study. That drug company ain't paying you nothing if you get hurt. You signed it away on a waiver. And that is where we are at in this approval process. Now, I'm all for right to try. I think that's a very cool and important thing. I think it advances medicine in a very quick way, but let's not kid ourselves. If there is serious harm and injury, there are hundreds of thousands of people now who have no financial set of recourse. And I just want to make that point clear.
I'm trying to find, so in relation to this, there's three smaller countries that, the president, and I'm not going to read it, was about not, and needless to say, they're no longer with us. Super weird. And yes, what I believe, it seems as though we've then sent for free to them the V word there, which I think is just so incredibly
in fact,
weird.
They just arrested a doctor today, I believe, in Miami, that they're saying is closely related to this issue. So be kind of on the lookout for this one, guys. It's really weird in our neck of the woods kind of issue. And I'll just point kind of back in history a little bit to the Contra Wars, and ask people to be willing to understand what we are willing to do when it serves our interests. Yep.
And yeah, it's sick and twisted. So this is interesting. I think this was a huge miscommunication. So Pfizer immediately said, last week, not immediately, but they go, we're already planning for the booster, and they announced it. They announced it too early, and the government and CDC squashed it instantly, because what that does is it proves our point. If we would have said this 4 months ago, it's a conspiracy theory. It's all these different things. It's a misinformation, or like you're just going to be getting boosters your whole life. And here we are 6 months in, and they're already talking about it. So that day, the CDC said, no, they spoke out of turn. This is the company that creates this. So I don't know how they made that big of a mistake, or how they didn't get on the same page. But let's be honest, the whole reason they pulled this thought process is because it proves a point and it scares people away. And they're not at the percentage of V-worded people that they want. And this, to them, halts that. It stops that process.
So, it's again, I'll put this out there. The division is clear, and they what happens, in my opinion, is the division fizzles out quickly. So it's got to be the next thing, right? So it was really convenient last summer during the election cycle for it to be the Black Lives Matter movement and the divisiveness that seemingly came out of that, for that to be the topic of focus, even though we were technically in a pandemic, right? And so where rubber meets the road is now here we are. We seemingly are coming out of that, the pandemic of an issue, and that we're not having the same type of interactions, I'll say, on the street this summer that we saw last summer, particularly. Now, always potential for it, but people got fatigued of that. Also, jobs have opened back up. People want to go back to work. And I think ultimately that was kind of a symptom of the problem that we were really feeling, which was the oppression. And so whether people want to, assign meaning to it or not, if that's your decision, but I will point out that, again, they're still putting something over the top of us that says, until we clear the issue, you can't move freely, you can't think freely, and you aren't the judge of your own corner of your life. So in my opinion, again, it's goalpost moving, which is traditional for the progressive movement, but it's particularly divisive in the sense that it creates a haves and have-nots situation. And they are absolutely talking about all of the things you can have if you comply, and all of the things you're not going to have if you choose not to. And that seemed like it was optional 6 months ago, and it no longer is looking that way.
I mean, let's look at it with the My Body, My Choice crowd, and then we'll be done with this. Technically, it's like, all right, if you want to do this whole thing, so are we going to start taking away rights from those that got an abortion? I mean, it's the same. I mean, it really is the same kind of concept. If you're saying it's affecting other people's lives, that's why we have to do it. I mean, and this is coming from somebody that's admittedly in some ways a very light version of pro-choice. I think there are certain elements. The best way to say it is I am not a staunch pro-lifer, but I'm saying if you're doing this whole, you don't have a choice to do things, and I believe it's okay to take away rights of those. So what does that mean? So they can't travel the world if you've had an abortion? You can't, I mean.
Yeah, I think the idea is that it's safe, legal, and rare, right? That's kind of my criteria for that particular issue. And in this situation, it should first be proved that it's safe. It should be made legal to have an option. And then it should be rare that there's any punitive damages for making a choice that is yours and yours alone. Like that's my comparison to that. I'll kind of piggyback. So it's a very interesting time.
So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, Danny. The flu variants didn't die out this flu season. The way viruses tend to work, based on the research that I have extensively done, is a stronger virus can actually stomp out a lesser virus. So because COVID, I am 100% in agreement with, is a strong virus and is a dangerous virus, more so than just the average flu in many ways, especially when you don't know how to treat it. Especially when you don't know how to treat it. Our flu we did not all of a sudden miraculously get rid of the flu because people wore a mask and didn't leave their house. That's just not how the flu works. Now, could we decrease the numbers of the flu? Yeah. But to bring it down to a screeching 0.001% of usual is just not the way life works. Sorry.
Well, it's also on that front. It's also, remember, when these mutations happen, that is a virus living its natural life cycle. And it typically, when it mutates, means that it's dying. It no longer can find suitable hosts, which requires it to mutate. So in my opinion, again, I think that these numbers, even though you're seeing a slight increase of infection, the fact that we're not seeing a spike in death actually is a good indicator that even though the Delta variant and the Lambda variant exist, that they are actually probably maybe highly more infectious, but probably less dangerous. And we don't have any stats specifically to back that up. But again, knowing some basic immunology and how viruses work, that is typically a good sign when we see tremendous mutation. It means that it's run through the basic course of biology and is now on the downturn to fizzle out. And there's only so many mutations that a virus can make before it falls into the category of naturally immune.
Right. And also COVID does show signs that have similarities, not, again, the same thing as the standard flu. And how do you prevent yourself from getting the flu? First off, you take care of yourself and you eat healthy, but some people believe in flu shots. So there is an element of, if you've had the COVID, you're protecting yourself. There's a little bit of research that shows that. So, I mean, and we've had so many people that have had it. We didn't eradicate the flu. The flu has just shifted this year. And there are several countries that we don't speak about unless you look at right-wing media or Australian news or whatever, that are actually making it a government mandate from this point forward to treat it like the flu, especially now that we know how to treat it early.
Yeah. And I'll kind of make it full circle. Again, the reason that these variants are important to cover on the news is because it leads us to believe we're not out of the woods. And I'm not by any means discounting the loss of life. I'm just saying, statistically speaking, we are. And so, if you are vaccinated, you're healthy, and you're ready to go out into public, this is where I think the American spirit really needs to come through, which is people need to act as though they have the protection which they are led to believe they have. And it is, in my opinion, a patriotic duty of an individual to go and be that example. So, if you're at the park.
No. Patriotic duty is taking the vaccine, Eric. Just ask Joey Basements. It's your patriotic duty to put an untested substance in your body.
Me and Joey Basements, I think would come to blows, but it is very interesting to see. As you've traveled, I'm sure you've seen this too, Russo, which is, you go through an airport. In California, it was mandated until June 14th or whatever it was. And then I've been going through the airports. I don't wear a mask through any portion of the airport, with the exception of getting on the plane, because it's required at this point. And the amount of people that look at me, I feel like I get two very different people. One is, my God, I wish I had that mental fortitude, and I see exactly what you're doing, and I'm all for it. Hoorah, right? And the other one is, I'm going to steer 200 feet extra clear of you, even if there's not space, and look at you like you're some sort of zoo animal. And quite frankly, on both fronts, leading by example is still important, which is, I feel like my risk is relatively low. If I'm to believe the statistics that are currently out there, then everybody else's risk is relatively low as well, whether that's infection or any sort of issue. So again, I'll just take it back to this point, which is, why do we need different variants to tell us whether we're out of the woods or not? We could just look at the statistics. We don't need news cycles talking about the Lambda and the Delta, and I'm sure the Alpha variant that's coming soon. Right.
Statistics, unfortunately, don't scare people when they're in this direction. So you have to create marketing, and it's the marketing behind it. And the great part is not the great part. The funny part is they're testing the vaccines. I can't remember which company. I think it was Pfizer, with the Delta variant, and it went from 93 or 96% efficacy to 64% efficacy. Whatever. All right, let's wrap this episode up talking about Texas Democrats, which leads us a little bit into voting. So here is, let me bring up this picture, and I'm assuming you've probably seen it a little bit today as well, or yesterday, whenever. Was it yesterday or today that this broke? I don't remember. Where is it? Here it is.
It was this morning. I think they all jumped on a plane.
So, do you want to give the backstory on what's going on and why this is such a big deal?
Yeah, sure. So, as you know, living in Texas, that the voter rights is something that they're trying to shore up from a legislature standpoint by pushing through some official ruling on some of the voting laws, particularly the voter ID portion of it. Mm-hmm. And honestly, this is something that people. I think, generally speaking, think that these things are already law, and so they lived and conduct themselves by these new proposed legislation things. In essence, what they're doing is they're just cracking down on basically like ballot harvesting. They're making sure that voter ID is implemented, and it's really something that I don't think people would actually know happened if it was to have been implemented. But the entire Democrat state legislature got on a plane and left so that they could not hold a quorum in order to do the vote, which they knew already kind of predisposed they were not going to win. So what did they do? They derelicted their duty. They got on an airplane, and I will point out all of these people on this screen over here are on an airplane unmasked. And they left to go to D.C. to have a meeting with Kamala Harris in complete dereliction of their state elected duties. And it's a huge problem. And Governor Abbott, I believe, has put a warrant on them, but has said that they will be arrested upon reentry of the state, which means that they will be arrested, returned to the hall until the vote has been able to take place. So they've put themselves in hot water. What they've done is gone to the federal level and had a meeting with now Kamala to do I don't know what other than get some kumbayas. But now they are in complete dereliction of their state and legislative duties. Big problem.
See, they're also here's and I know that and Eric said this as well in the comments that Republicans have done this as well, and I get that, and we call it out either way. I don't believe this is a proper way of doing business for Republicans or Democrats, but let's take what's happening here. They're not going essentially in protest of this quorum to go deal with other matters. They are specifically going to talk about how to create a federal law circumventing the state, which constitutionally is everything that we're not about. The Constitution gives these kind of rights to the states, why we select Congress members in the state, why we select governor, why we select things very specifically to rule things the way we want in our own state. So they are technically leaving to then usurp the state law, try to usurp, because in the end, they're buying time to see if they can come up with an idea on how federally to change, to make these federal voting laws more, or to set precedent over the state laws. As for the mask comments, I think masks are bullshit. We all know this. I don't give a shit if they're not wearing a mask. That would be hypocritical for me to fully lay into them for that. It is a private plane. I'm sure all of these useful politicians, idiots, are V-worded, so they're allowed to do whatever they want. I could care less, whatever.
That certainly was the justification.
Yeah, so I'm sure they're like, we're all V-word, we're all jab. Yeah. There's no chance. I would bet a lot of money that all 58 people have all had the Fauci ouchie on this plane. Whatever. But ultimately, what they are doing is more dangerous than usual because they are being in dereliction of their duties specifically to find a backwards way to change voting on a national level so that it circumvents the state. And that's super dangerous. That's a totalitarian government. Again, we are looking at a federal issue that should be run by the states. If you don't want to live there, don't be there. Let's look at what's going on right now. As we're doing this, there's an all-star game happening in Colorado that has worse state voting laws than Georgia, and it stole from Black-owned businesses all the money they could be making. It literally shows the idiocy. If any leftist can come on and tell me, how that makes sense, how that, well, they got racist voting. Let's say it's the dumbest shit. This falls under the category of you can't argue it the other direction without sounding like the biggest moron on the planet. There's no way to actually have that conversation.
The blatant racism that exists that people want to call systemic or systematic, kind of interchangeable there. This is actually a great example. The MLB absolutely made a decision not based on the best thing for the communities that they are in public support of, but they did, in fact, the worst thing they could do for those communities, and they destroyed their businesses, their livelihoods, and their opportunities moving forward. So I'm really disappointed with the MLB in that fashion.
I love this statement. This is ironic because I heard this earlier. I was like, that's funny. No matter if it's chartered or private, they still have to show an ID to board, yet they're going to talk about how it's unfair for people to have an ID. And to be very clear, what these voter laws are talking about, most of these states are simply rolling back COVID era, pandemic era.
And they were emergency powers. Yeah.
Emergency powers for all the ballots, extra ballots, everybody receiving them, the extra ballot drop boxes, all these different things that have nothing to do with racism. And I'm like Joe Biden's comments yesterday, 2 days ago, it's a marketing campaign. So then you ask yourself, what's racist about it? I've had this conversation now over the last 3 weeks, multiple times on social media. What is racist about it? On these people that are just like protesting these voting rights. What's racist about it?
It's
nobody.
Crazy to me. You know who's getting put up for an Emmy right now? Stacey Abrams.
Oh God.
And the reason why is because of her supposed support for voter rights. So the question becomes is, at what point do we say a ballot is either valid or invalid? And look, even in the state of California, if you're not here legally, you can still go to the DMV and get a driver's license. In fact, it's legally required that you do so. It's much harder. Even if you're not here legally in this country, you can't do anything in California without your ID. So It was something that people don't even realize. They actually allowed a whole lot more people to gain what looks like citizenship through the DMV services, and they did it without ever being here in any sort of legal status to begin with. And that was, again, pitched to the California public as a way to track statistics of how many people are here legally and illegally. And ultimately, all it was a ploy to get them ID so that they could vote. So this whole issue of voter ID stuff, it reeks of bureaucracy in a lot of ways. Like, they just want to make it super easy for anybody to walk into any voting place. They want for illegal immigrants to be able to vote. They want for, in essence, to me, again, goes to diluting votes from the constituents to which they belong. And it's such a ridiculous argument because there are so many venues and ways for them to obtain ID, whether you're here illegally or illegally. So this argument of ID is the problem is, to me, it reeks of looking at a group of people and saying you're too ignorant to even run your own life, where if you got pulled over, you'd go to jail for not having your license on you. If you wanted to get into a bar and the health department showed up and you weren't able to provide ID to show that you're over 21 years of age, they would get shut down. Like, at some point, guys, ID is not an obstacle. Mental health is an obstacle that can be, I guess, talked about, but getting an ID is not hard.
I'm even trying to just look at articles, and all it is speaking points like Jim Crow 2.0. It's just unfairly impacting black voters. There's an article in the Washington Times, which appears as though this is a little bit more right wing. I've actually never seen the Washington Times, I don't think. But it does talk about there's studies out there that show tighter election laws such as voter ID requirements have not actually hurt anybody. The actual statistic looks the same in states that have more strict voting laws in terms of the amount of minorities, percentage of the population that shows up. The number of voters decreased by one turnout in 5 states. It found no significant impact. Turnout increased in one of the states, and the number of voters decreased in 4 of the other states, but only by 1 to 4%. There's just nobody has provided a single thing that makes this bad. I'm trying to look at articles, and it's all marketing. And why? Now the question becomes, Eric, why is it important for them to maintain COVID era voting?
So again, this is absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if we can't look at our governors and say, man, they took an inch or they took a mile when we gave them an inch, then we're not being pragmatic and realistic about our lifestyles right now. Guys, a year and a half ago, nobody would have considered that going to vote without an ID was actually a proper way to vote. Like this was never a discussion, but only by design. And I say that it was by design because, look, whether or not you want to get into conspiracy stuff or not, it doesn't matter. The Democrats are absolutely famous for taking a crisis and making it a political win. And so this argument of voter ID, it doesn't shake out for them in any way that makes me look at it and say, oh, people are having a hard time getting ID to vote, and therefore, their vote's not counting, and there's a big issue with that. It's something like when they look into these statistics, it's like 0.00001% of people who vote don't have a valid ID. And most of these restrictions that have come in from not the state legislatures, who are the ultimate people that make the decisions around elections in each and every state, and they are different, although some of them very similar. They stripped that power away, and they went straight either to the AG or to the governor, and they made executive power decisions, and we haven't taken them back.
No.
So, and it is
Still with me, Eric? I know
constitutionally
my-
mandated that the state legislatures do this. So, like when anybody who doesn't see this as an issue, we have to talk about what the mandate federally is. Every state is required through the state legislature specifically, who are our ultimate representatives, right? We have our federal legislators, which are our senators and our Congress people that we send to the federal legislation table. But we also have our state legislation table, our state's Congress, our state Senate. And those people are supposed to make these rules. And they've been usurped, thrown to the side, and said, well, it is what it is now. Adopt it or die.
So here's the Dean. It's I get it. You have to pay for an ID. You actually don't. If you are not able to afford it in most states, including Georgia, it's free to get an ID. And what's interesting is once all of these things were proven, right now they try to avoid the voter ID argument. Why? Because they've literally done like polls on the street to black people, like, do you have an ID? Is the ID available for free? Yeah. So that idea is squashed. I'm looking at a 2006 article right before the election that year. Where is this on? This is on Ben and Jerry's website.
Wait, are you about to show some hypocritical shit here?
I am. So, well, the thing is, back then it was all talking about ID required. So the article title is "Why Voter ID Laws Are Discriminatory." So aren't they like dispelling the voter ID? They're not using that. They're using the water in line now. They're using some of I think I'm out of what they're using. I think it's literally just using marketing. But why voter ID laws are discriminatory and why our elections are definitely not rigged. Whatever. This is also before COVID, and I think things have just gotten worse. Don't all Americans have an ID? What's the big deal? At first blush, the idea of everyone having identify themselves at polls doesn't seem too controversial, right? After all, ID is required for all sorts of transactions. Agreed. Everything from renting a car, obtaining a library card. The truth is, though, that while many of us may find these voting requirements not too difficult to manage, a policy can't be judged solely on how the affluent or comfortable handle it. We have to ensure that everyone else has access and opportunity too. And studies have shown that some people in this country are far less likely to have a valid ID than others. Okay, well, you've got 2 years, or if you're for 3 years, if you're talking about 2022, you've got enough time to figure it out. If you don't care enough to figure out how to get a fucking ID, then guess what? You don't vote. It's not racist. It's just like, do we want decisions being made by the lowest, laziest common denominator that does not take the choice to simply ask a question that they can ask anyone and go, what do I do? And somebody with a phone, even if they're poor, broke, destitute, can go here. And they can go there. They can walk there. They can do something to get there. And if you can't go to do that, then how are you going to be able to go vote? You still have to go do that, or you have to do a mail-in if you don't have an address. There is nothing that somebody can tell me from a logical perspective that IDs having an ID is racist. Now they've gotten rid of this 4 years later because they've realized it's been disproven. Go ahead, Eric.
I can make one argument for voter ID being an obstacle, and it could be the cost of entry, which is if you are destitute poor, it could be difficult for you to pay the service fees in order to have an ID made for you. However, because we are the great United States of America, I'm not aware of any state that does not provide those services for free or at a significantly discounted rate based on your current income status. So I'm kind of reading a few of the comments over here, and I've seen people talking about the state of California. I know this to be a fact, is that in the state of California, if you don't meet in some certain income requirements, that they will just give you an ID for free. And in fact, that is how many of the people that are here on overstayed visas or crossed illegally were able to obtain ID, is because they were able to do that using the social services that we have available to us. That may not be the case in every state. I can't say for sure that I know all 50 have that same sort of workaround, but I am fairly confident that I could say that most states have some sort of assistance program Getting an ID is actually something that they want you to do, and in most states is mandated that you carry with you, just as a general rule after the age of 18. So if you are an adult over the age of 18 and do not have a license, there are assistance programs for you, but specifically the hurdle of cost, I could get behind an argument that is made there, but we have
Bill in the California Bill AB 1733 provides free ID to homeless people that cannot afford at the time the $25 in order to get an ID. Georgia is the same way. Theirs is $35, $38, whatever it is. Same exact thing. If you cannot afford it, you get a free ID in the city. Yes, it takes a step to go get an ID. We all had to take the step to go get a damn ID. It's life.
I am a proponent of, if you want to vote to have policies in our country be effective to you, we should be able. It's not about tracking you down. It's about asking you about why you made that decision. And if we can't ask why, or at least question the premise of how you came to your conclusions, which I think is already taboo, then it feels like they've already won this war to some extent, because we're not allowed to ask people. You're not allowed to ask, well, like, is your ID valid? Well, that's not a fair question here in the state of California. That'll get you in some trouble, right? So I do see that there are some obstacles, but they are very minuscule obstacles, and in fact, huge opportunities to prove wrong that there is no illegal voting happening, by saying, yeah, in fact, voter ID is very important, and that is the only cost of entry, and in fact, it's free.
If you can't get over the very basic hurdle of figuring out how to get a free ID, do we want you? Do I want this person making a decision on who's going to run their state? I'm sorry, if that's deemed hateful, that whatever. No. If you can't do the simple task of receiving something for free, how can you be trusted to vote in the United States of America?
Everybody in the comment section, you are right. Everybody needs an ID for these things, but you also, if you are a U.S. citizen over the age of 18, I think in 38 of our 50 states, it is a legal requirement for you to carry it on your persons. So, like, if that's racist, then already, 80% of the country is so ingrained in that racism, it's too late. But I just don't. I will never buy that argument. Sorry, guys.
No, there's just no point. And then the rest of the ones we ask, and all we're hearkening back to the days of Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow. How? Nobody can answer the question of how these voting restrictions. Oh, they're pulling boxes from the inner city. Look at where the voting boxes were in 2016. It's still more than it will be after this. We've increased that. Most states have increased the amount of early voting. They've increased so many different options to make it possible. These are not racist, but they're using what happened in 2020 and saying, oh, there was 93 in downtown Atlanta, and now there's going to be 24. They're doing this to make it so black people can't vote. No, they're doing it because they're assuming we are going to go back to regular voting, which, God, we should, because the whole country, whether you believe there was issues with the election or not, let's at least make it secure to the people and just make people believe it so we don't hate each other.
The argument that it was not a secure election is not actually based in this idea, in my opinion, that there was a huge amount of voter fraud. Let me be clear on what my position on it is. It's that the state legislatures did not make these decisions, and the governors and other powers that be did. And that is strictly reserved for emergency powers. And even then, it's constitutionally argued that never falls into their wheelhouse. So I just, I'll put it in this way. My issue in saying that there was potential fraud actually goes straight at the heart of every state government that adopted emergency powers that has not relinquished them to the state legislature. So I don't know if there's mass amounts of ballots out there that were flipped and changed and uncounted. The fraud was a legislative fraud.
Yep.
And that in and of itself is enough for me to say, whoa, 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 whoa. So I don't know if we're going to find all these ballots and there's going to be an election and all this. I don't care really at this point. We got to march forward. But that's what the fraud was. When people talk about there being fraud in the election, I'm not going to get tangled in my words. It was emergency powers stripping the legislatures of their duty based on constitutional standards. That's it.
100%. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if anybody wondered, I know I commented a couple times on the side where Suni went. Suni's kids were acting a little bit rough. It happens. It's why you.
I'm gonna start whispering so like Joe Biden can hear me occasionally.
I don't know. Yeah, you're speaking. It's like whales talking to each other under the water. Anyways, all right, guys, we are going to do an episode of Concert Avengers tomorrow night. I do not have any change makers. We've got the week off on that, getting the old reset as I come back to the real world. I will do a motivational Monday, aka Getting Over the Hump Wednesday tomorrow. Thank you guys for joining. Final words, Easy.
I think here in California, we got an important election coming up. I think Larry Elder is an incredible opportunity choice. I know there are some people in here that watch from up north and some people here from Southern California as well. I'm going to be leaving the state based on some decisions that I've made for my family and our personal life. I may stay just to get my vote in on this particular issue. It certainly is worth the 14 days to me to see my home state come back to a place where I'd like it to be. But remember, everybody who's voting out there, this is an incredibly tricky process. We need one candidate to receive a majority vote in order to proceed with these special election type issues. So let's make it happen. I think, like I said, go do your own research. But Larry Elder seems like an incredible choice to me. Do your homework. Let's get this one knocked out. And then 22 is literally 6 months away at this point. So as you're doing your homework on this election in September here in California, remember to do it on the 22 election that's coming up. You should see your Senate as well as your congressional leaders putting their bids out here in the next, I would say, month, maybe 2 months, at least putting the feelers. So let's push towards that election. Let's be very cognizant that when people knock on your door and they want to know your medical status, you have every right to tell them to F off your property. And please enforce your right to do so the rest of us can see that that is something we do in droves and as a mass. And I'll leave kind of there.
I'm actually going to offer them like weird looking cake or weird looking like meatloaf. They're going to be like, no, thank you. Like, oh, like, because you don't know what's in it fully. You don't want to eat it. Exactly.
I'm definitely going to put pot brownies on the porch. So
probably healthier.
They can come to my house, but they're all going to forget what their job was. And since they're community leaders, they'll forget about it anyways.
Oh, I can't wait. Tomorrow night on Concert Avengers, speaking of pot brownies or AKA gummies, I got a funny story about Woody while I was on my vacation. So they were not my gummies, just to be clear. Anyways, all right, guys, be the change you wish to see in the world. One of the key things we do on these shows is we want to have hard conversations, talk about what's going on. We will bring people on occasion. I'm hoping to do the younger audience next week. We'll see. I pushed my life back a week. I needed some time. But guys, the ultimate thing here is just having conversations. And that's what I'm about with Be the Change. And these shows are about, we make jokes, we kid around, but often the intention behind it is to create information, and the intention behind it is to create different viewpoints. And all of those viewpoints are valid because we live in the United States of America and we have the right to feel certain ways. And that's what we talk about. Anyways, ladies and gents, have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday night, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Deuces.